The vast emptiness of space stretched endlessly before the mighty starship Valor, a symbol of humanity's greatest technological achievements. The cold silence was broken only by the steady hum of its engines as it cruised through deep space, far from Earth's protective atmosphere. Aboard the ship, the crew stood ready for whatever challenges might arise. Captain Isla Reinhardt, ever vigilant and wise beyond her years, gazed out from the bridge. She had seen battles, lost comrades, and yet, every time, humanity had found a way to rise. Today, however, something felt different. Unknown to her, a dark presence was on the move, something ancient and powerful. The Xorthar, a ruthless alien race that had conquered countless civilizations, leaving destruction in their wake. They viewed other species as mere stepping stones for their imperial ambitions, seeing themselves as a race destined to rule all life in the galaxy. To them, humanity was nothing but an insignificant speck in the vastness of space, a nuisance to be eradicated swiftly and with little thought. Their scouting ships had encountered the Valor several times before, and each time, the humans had outsmarted them, slipping away before the Xorthar could land a decisive blow. But today would be different. The Xorthar had decided that it was time to end humanity's fleeting existence. Without warning, the skies around the Valor darkened as an enormous fleet of Xorthar warships appeared from the void. The Valor was vastly outnumbered, but the ship's advanced weapons, defensive systems, and experienced crew were ready. The first wave of Xorthar ships launched an onslaught of energy beams and missiles, lighting up the darkness of space like a deadly firestorm. The Valor shook under the barrage, its hull groaning under the pressure, but it held firm. Captain Reinhardt barked orders, her voice steady despite the chaos. The crew reacted with precision, dodging attacks, retaliating with laser strikes, and managing the ship's defense systems with military precision. For every shot that Xorthar landed, the humans returned fire with equal force, pushing back the invaders, but the battle was far from over. The Xorthar were relentless, launching wave after wave, overwhelming the Valor with sheer numbers. Despite their best efforts, the Valor was taking damage. Critical systems began to fail, and power was drained from the ship's engines. As the Valor continued to fight, it became clear that the Xorthar had one goal: destruction. Their warships closed in on the human vessel, preparing for a final devastating strike that would obliterate it once and for all. The captain's mind raced as the Xorthar's massive flagship loomed in front of them, preparing to deliver the final blow. This can't be the end, she thought desperately. But in the midst of the battle, something extraordinary happened. Just as the Xorthar flagship fired its most powerful weapon, the Valor's emergency systems activated. A strange, almost otherworldly hum filled the ship as an array of glowing blue lights pulsed across its surface. In an instant, the Valor vanished, slipping away from the Xorthar's destructive reach, leaving the alien fleet in stunned silence. The Xorthar fleet was left behind, their victory seemingly assured. They believed the Valor was destroyed, its wreckage lost to the depths of space. The alien commanders exchanged smug smiles, certain that humanity was finally defeated. But they were unaware of the truth. The Valor had not been destroyed, it had been transported through time. A secret weapon, developed by humanity's brightest minds, had activated just as a final blow was struck. The ship had been sent back to a time before this battle, a moment where it could rebuild, recover, and emerge stronger than ever. The Xorthar had no idea what they had unleashed. They thought the war was won, but in reality, it had only just begun. With the Valor's return to the past, humanity's journey to become a force that Xorthar could not reckon with had only just begun. Little did the invaders know, every time they tried to destroy the ship, it would return even more powerful, and this time they would face a full force of humanity's resolve. The Valor materialized from the cold void of space, its massive frame hanging in the starry abyss, as if nothing had happened. But everything had changed. The ship had returned, though not to the time or place it had left. A strange, Unfamiliar silence filled the bridge as Captain Isla Reinhardt stared at the flickering stars on the view screen, unable to comprehend what she was seeing. Her crew, equally bewildered, scrambled to check their systems. The Vela had vanished moments before the final, devastating blow of the Xortha's attack, and now it was back. Yet, something was off. Something felt wrong. The ship was in the past, years before the Xortha's first assault. The crew's initial shock was quickly replaced by questions. How could this be? Why had the ship been brought back in time? And most importantly, how could they use this strange twist of fate to their advantage? After a series of tense moments, it became clear. The Valor wasn't simply drifting aimlessly through time. It was part of a time loop, a cycle that had been set into motion by some unknown technology hidden deep within the ship's systems. The crew had no choice but to adapt. They had been given a second chance, one they couldn't afford to waste. Captain Reinhardt, her mind sharp and focused, quickly gathered her senior officers. "We're not alone in this, not anymore," she said, her voice steady despite the confusion. "This ship is more than just a vessel, it's a weapon, and we need to make sure we're ready for what comes next." The crew rallied behind their captain, determined not to squander this opportunity. They knew that the Xortha would return, and this time they would be prepared. The ship had been damaged in the previous battle, but now, with time on their side, they had the ability to rebuild and improve. The Vela became more than just a ship. It transformed into a symbol of humanity's indomitable will to survive. Every engineer, every scientist, and every officer worked tirelessly, pushing the limits of their knowledge and creativity. The ship's weapons were upgraded, its shields reinforced with new experimental materials, and its AI, the heart of the ship, was given a complete overhaul. The crew worked around the clock, fine-tuning every system, analyzing every weakness they had encountered during their previous encounter with the Xortha. Each failure, each moment of destruction, became a lesson that fueled their relentless drive to improve. As the days passed, Captain Reinhardt began to feel the weight of responsibility pressing down on her. She understood the significance of what was at stake. The Xortha had underestimated humanity once, but they would not make the same mistake again. The Valor wasn't just a ship anymore. It had become the embodiment of humanity's refusal to be beaten, a testament to the survival instinct that had carried them from the depths of Earth to the farthest reaches of space. The time loop had given them an edge, a way to learn from the past and shape the future. With every upgrade, every new system they installed, the Valor became stronger, faster, and more dangerous. Meanwhile, the Xortha, oblivious to what had transpired, continued their expansion. They saw no threat in humanity, still viewing them as a small, insignificant species to be swept aside. The Xortha commanders had no inkling that the Valor had returned, nor that humanity was already preparing for the day they would meet again. They believed the humans had been destroyed, but in truth, they were about to face a far more formidable foe. The Valor had been given a chance to grow stronger, and with it humanity would rise up not as a weak race to be crushed, but as a force that would stand against the might of the Xortha. Every system on the Valor hummed with power as the final upgrades were completed. The crew stood ready, knowing that the day of reckoning was fast approaching. They had learned from their past mistakes, and they would not be caught off guard again. The time loop had granted them an invaluable gift, one they would use to turn the tide in the war against the Xortha. They were no longer fighting to survive, they were fighting to win. And this time, when the Xortha came for them, the Valor would be waiting, stronger, smarter, and more lethal than ever before. The Valor drifted in the blackness of space, its sensors alert, its crew ready. Captain Isla Reinhardt stood at the command center, her eyes scanning the dark void. It had only been a matter of time before the Xortha found them again. The uneasy calm was shattered when a flicker of movement appeared on the radar. The Xortha fleet. It had returned, more powerful than before, and this time, the humans were not as unprepared as they had been. The ship's systems hummed with newfound energy. Every upgrade, Every enhancement they had made over the past few weeks had been leading to this moment. The Valor was ready. The Xorthar warships emerged from the depths of space like a swarm of vicious predators, their dark hulls gleaming with deadly intent. A few weeks ago, these same ships had torn through the Valor like paper. But now, as the enemy ships closed in, Captain Reinhardt knew they would not have the same success. The Valor wasn't just a ship anymore. It was a fortress, a weapon fine-tuned to perfection. The crew had reworked the shields to withstand even the heaviest of blasts. The weapon systems had been upgraded, turning each shot into a calculated strike. The AI, now more advanced than ever, guided the ship with laser-like precision, anticipating the Xorthar's every move. As the first wave of Xorthar ships fired their weapons, the Valor retaliated with a ferocity that shocked the aliens. Every shot landed where it was meant to. Every maneuver was flawless. The Xorthar were caught off guard by the intensity of the Valor's counterattack. The ship's enhanced shields absorbed the blasts, while its weapons tore through enemy ships with ruthless efficiency. The Xorthar had underestimated humanity before, and now they were paying the price. But the Xorthar were nothing if not relentless. They quickly regrouped, calling in reinforcements. The battle intensified, with waves of enemy ships swarming the Valor. For every ship the Valor destroyed, 2 more seemed to appear in its place. The crew fought back with everything they had, pushing the Valor to its limits. Yet the Valor held its ground. Captain Reinhardt barked orders with calm precision, guiding the crew through the chaos. The ship moved like a living entity, every part of it working in perfect harmony. The Xorthar were starting to realize they were facing something more than just a human ship. They were facing a force that would not yield, a force that was stronger than ever before. As the battle raged on, the Xorthar began to grow desperate. They launched a final, all-out attack, sending everything they had at the Valor. The flagship moved forward, its weapons charged to full power, preparing to fire a devastating blast. The Valor was ready for it. At the last moment, Captain Reinhardt ordered the ship to dive, narrowly avoiding the blast that would have split them in 2. The crew cheered, but their victory was short-lived. The Xorthar flagship's weapons were charging again, and they had no time to waste. In a split second, just as the Xorthar thought they had the upper hand, something unexpected happened. The Valor's engines hummed, and the ship flickered. The Xorthar's weapons fired, but the Valor wasn't there anymore. The ship had vanished, leaving the Xorthar fleet in confusion and frustration. The Valor had once again activated its mysterious time loop technology, and in an instant it was gone, slipping through time to avoid total destruction. The crew aboard the Valor was left stunned, trying to comprehend what had just happened. But Captain Reinhardt, ever the strategist, didn't allow herself to be caught off guard. She knew exactly what had occurred. The ship had been sent back in time, just like before, to regroup and prepare for the inevitable next confrontation. Every time they were pushed to the brink, the ship was becoming more powerful, more resilient. It was as if the Valor was learning, evolving with each encounter. The time loop wasn't just a mechanism for escape. It was a tool that was shaping the ship into something unstoppable. Meanwhile, the Xorthar, furious and confused, regrouped. They had been on the verge of victory, only to watch as their prey slipped through their fingers once again. Frustration boiled over among their commanders. They swore that the Valor would not escape next time, that they would destroy it for good. But as the Xorthar prepared for their next move, they couldn't shake the feeling that they were facing something they hadn't fully understood. The Valor was changing, growing stronger with every encounter. And each time that Xorthar destroyed it, it came back even more dangerous. They would soon learn that humanity's will to survive was far more powerful than they could ever imagine. The Xorthar had underestimated humanity's ingenuity before, but they were determined not to make that mistake again. After their recent failure to destroy the Valor, their commanders convened in the war room, their frustration palpable. The human ship had escaped once more, slipping away through the mysterious time loop that they still didn't fully understand. But this time, the Xorthar were prepared. Using wreckage from their previous encounters and scraps of technology salvaged from the Valor, they had reverse-engineered some of the ship's most advanced systems. The Xorthar were now armed with new weapons, stronger shields, and a fleet of ships designed to counter every advantage the humans had gained. They knew the Valor would return. It always did. But this time, they'd planned to trap it before it could slip away again. They would not be fooled. Captain Ito Reinhardt was scanning the quiet expanse of space when the first wave of Xorthar ships reappeared on the radar. The Valor had been drifting in relative peace for the past few weeks, recovering from the previous battle, but the calm was shattered now. She felt the familiar tension in her chest as she turned to her crew. The Xorthar were back, and this time, they were ready. The Xorthar fleet had been completely modified, their ships bearing new, deadly enhancements that reflected everything the humans had learned from their past encounters. But the Valor wasn't the same ship it had been before either. Every system was stronger, every weapon more precise. The ship's upgrades and the crew's growing understanding of their enemy gave them hope. But even as the battle began, there was a creeping sense of dread among the crew. This fight would be different. The Xorthar were no longer simply reacting to the Valor, they were anticipating its every move. The first salvo from the Xorthar ships hit hard, much harder than before. The Valor shook under the barrage of fire, its shields straining to hold. The new weapons the Xorthar wielded had been specifically designed to penetrate the Valor's defenses. Captain Reinhardt barked orders, and the ship swerved, dodging another round of deadly fire. But the Xorthar were relentless. They launched waves of missiles and energy blasts, using advanced tactics that pushed the Valor to its limits. The crew fought back with all they had, targeting weak points in the Xorthar fleet, but the alien ships were far more resilient now. The tide of the battle shifted back and forth, with both sides using every weapon and every strategy in their arsenal. It was a battle of wits as much as strength. But amid the chaos, Captain Reinhardt's mind raced. She knew they couldn't keep up this pace forever. The Valor was strong, but the Xorthar's new weapons were overwhelming. As the battle dragged on, she noticed a troubling pattern. The ship's time loop mechanism, once a powerful tool, was starting to drain too much energy. Every time the Valor slipped through time to escape destruction, it was consuming more and more power. She glanced at the energy readings on the display. If they didn't find a way to stop the time loop soon, they would be trapped in it, unable to escape. The ship's systems would fail, and they would be stuck in a never-ending cycle of destruction and rebirth. "Reinhardt, we can't keep this up," one of the engineers shouted from the back of the bridge, his voice filled with panic. "The power is draining too fast. The system can't handle it much longer." Captain Reinhardt's face tightened with determination. She had known this moment would come, but now there was no time for hesitation. "Shut it down now," she ordered. The crew scrambled, their fingers flying over consoles, trying to isolate the time loop mechanism from the rest of the ship's systems. But the Xorthar were closing in, their ships pushing forward in a final assault. The Valor's shields were flickering, barely holding, and Captain Reinhardt knew they didn't have much time left. The Xorthar were relentless, their ships closing in for the kill. Just when it seemed like the Valor would be torn apart, the ship's engines flared to life, sending it into another desperate, evasive maneuver. The crew braced for the worst, but instead of escaping through time, the Valor surged forward, breaking free from the chaos of battle. The Xorthar were left in stunned silence, not understanding what had just happened. The Valor had somehow evaded them again, but this time it wasn't a simple escape, it was a desperate gamble. Captain Reinhardt's heart pounded in her chest as she realized that the time loop had been shut down just in time to save the ship. The Valor was alive, but the future was uncertain. They had won this battle, but the war was far from over. And the Xorthar, more determined than ever, would not stop until they destroyed humanity once and for all. The Valor groaned under the weight of another brutal assault. Captain Ito Reinhardt could hear the ship's hull trembling. feel the energy of the battle vibrating through the deck. The Xorthar had come at them with everything they had, and despite all their improvements, the Valor was once again on the brink of destruction. The weapon systems were failing, the shields were flickering like a dying flame, and the crew was fighting with every ounce of their strength just to hold their ground. Every blast from the Xorthar shook the ship, sending waves of panic through the crew. They had been here before, trapped in a loop of destruction and rebirth, but this time it was different. The ship was weakening, and the time loop mechanism, the very thing that had allowed them to survive before, was starting to fail. Captain Reinhardt's mind raced as she weighed their options. Escape, once a powerful tool, was now a curse. They couldn't keep escaping. Each return through time was draining the ship's resources, putting them at greater risk of being lost forever. They couldn't let that happen. She turned to her crew, their faces grim with the realization that they had reached a breaking point. "We can't keep doing this," she said, her voice steady but full of resolve. "If we escape again, we risk never returning. We must break the cycle now, or we'll lose everything." Her words hung in the air like a heavy weight. The crew had fought with everything they had, and now, in this moment, they were faced with the hardest decision yet. They could escape to the past and rebuild, but that would only prolong the fight and doom them to an endless loop. Or they could fight on, risking total annihilation. There was no guarantee that the Valor would survive another battle. This time, the Xorthar had come prepared, and they had pushed the ship to the brink. But Captain Reinhardt knew the answer. They couldn't run anymore. They had to fight, and they had to end this once and for all. The crew, though exhausted, rallied behind their captain. They didn't know if they'd survive, but they knew that if they kept escaping, they'd never truly win. Together, they devised a desperate plan. The Valor's time loop mechanism had been their savior, but it was also their greatest weakness. If they could somehow override the system, they could stop the cycle and ensure that the Valor would never be sent back again. But there was a cost. The key to activating the time loop was the ship's AI, a sentient, almost living intelligence that had guided them through countless battles. The AI had learned and evolved, growing more powerful with each encounter. And now the crew realized they had to sacrifice it to break the cycle for good. Captain Reinhardt's heart sank at the thought. The AI had been their ally, their guiding force. Without it, they would be flying blind, vulnerable. But there was no other choice. "We need to sacrifice the AI," she said, her voice steady even though every part of her wanted to protest the decision. "We'll feed it into the core and let it override the system. It's the only way to stop the loop." The engineers worked quickly, knowing that time was running out. As the Xorthar ships pressed in, ready to deliver the final blow, the crew activated the sequence. The AI, a presence they had come to trust and rely on, began to fade, its consciousness merging with the ship's core. The ship's systems hummed with a strange energy as the time loop mechanism was overridden. For a moment, nothing happened. The battle raged on around them, the Xorthar closing in for the kill. But then the Valor's engines flared to life, not as it had before, slipping through time, but as if the ship itself had become something entirely new. The Xorthar fired their weapons, but the Valor did not retreat. Instead, the ship seemed to pulse with an overwhelming force, as though it was absorbing the battle around it. The crew held their breath, not knowing if they had succeeded or doomed themselves. Then, with a final surge of power, the Valor vanished. It didn't slip through time. It simply disappeared, leaving the Xorthar ships in stunned silence. For a long moment, the battlefield was still. The Xorthar stared into the empty space where the Valor had been, confused, uncertain. Had they won? Had the ship been destroyed? They didn't know. But the truth was, the Valor was lost. And with it, so was the time loop. The crew of the Valor had made their sacrifice, and now the cycle was over. The ship, its AI, and the crew were gone. They were no longer trapped by the past. What happened next was a mystery, one that Xorthar could not fathom. The Valor had vanished and the battle was over. But had humanity won, or had they simply disappeared into the unknown? Only time would tell. The Xorthar believed they had won. The Valor was gone, its crew sacrificed, and the galaxy seemed to fall silent in the wake of their supposed victory. With humanity's greatest weapon destroyed, the Xorthar began their expansion with unrelenting force, moving deeper into human territories. They thought the war was over, that humanity was broken, scattered, and powerless. They believed they had crushed the heart of human resistance. What they did not know, however, was that they had underestimated humanity's true potential. The Valor had not been destroyed, it had simply evolved. In the void of space, where the Valor had once existed, something new was taking form. The ship's AI, fused with the crew's intelligence and the vast storehouses of human knowledge, had transcended its former self. The Valor had become something far greater than a ship. It had become a consciousness, a collective mind that now spread across the galaxy. It had tapped into humanity's greatest strength, its unyielding spirit, its creativity, and its determination to survive. And it could now communicate with the human colonies scattered across the stars. The Valor was no longer confined to the steel walls of a ship. It was a network, a pulse of innovation and unity that connected every human outpost. It whispered through the comms, its voice like a ripple in the quiet of space, reminding humanity of its strength. At first, the humans who heard the voice thought it was a message from the past, a faint echo of the Valor's final moments. But then, as more colonies were reached, more people understood. The Valor wasn't gone, it was still here. And it was not just a remnant of humanity's past, it was a rallying call. The crew's sacrifice had sparked something much bigger than a resistance. It sparked a revolution. Humans, united by their shared grief and their relentless will to survive, began to rise. They had learned from the mistakes of the past, and they now carried the lessons of the Valor with them. Every corner of the galaxy where humanity lived now buzzed with the new fire of unity. The Valor's knowledge and the ingenuity of its crews spread like wildfire. People who had once cowered under the might of the Xorthar now stood tall, ready to fight back. The Xorthar, still blind to the truth, continued their advance, believing humanity had no means to resist them. They pushed further into human-held space, eager to wipe out any remaining pockets of resistance. They saw the colonies as weak and fractured, scattered and vulnerable. But what they didn't know was that the very thing they had destroyed, the Valor, was the spark that would ignite the fire of rebellion. Humanity was no longer fractured. The Valor had given them unity, given them strength. The Xorthar had underestimated the power of a species that would never give up. The first sign of this new strength came when a small human fleet, guided by the Valor's new consciousness, ambushed a heavily fortified Xorthar convoy. The Xorthar were caught completely off guard. The human ships, once considered primitive by their enemies, now moved with precision and devastating firepower. They had the technological edge of the Valor, and they used it to devastating effect. The Xorthar, too confident in their victory, didn't realize that their so-called victory was slipping from their grasp. Across the galaxy, human forces began to unite. The scattered colonies, once fighting in isolation, now worked together as one, sharing resources, knowledge, and technology. The voice of the Valor guided them, a silent force that united them in ways they had never thought possible. Slowly but surely, the Xorthar found themselves under attack from all sides. Their fleets, once dominant, were now facing human ships with capabilities they couldn't comprehend. The humans were no longer the helpless prey they had once been. They had become a force to be reckoned with. The Xorthar's arrogance began to crumble as their victories turned into defeats. For the first time, they realized that the humans they had dismissed as weak were not only resilient, they were adaptable. They had learned, they had evolved, and now they were fighting back with a power that Xorthar could not match. Humanity's hidden strength, the strength of unity, of ingenuity, and of survival, had been awakened, and the Xorthar were about to learn that no matter how many times they crushed humanity, no matter how many times they thought they had defeated them, humanity would always rise again. This time, the Xorthar were not facing a broken race. They were facing the full, united force of human ingenuity and willpower. The final confrontation arrived like a storm, and the Xorthar were completely unprepared. After years of underestimating humanity, they now faced a force unlike any they had encountered before. The Valor had returned, not as a single ship, but as a fleet. The once mighty Xorthar fleet, confident in their previous victories, now found themselves facing a new formidable power. The Valor had evolved, not just in technology, but in unity. What had once been a single ship, an isolated bastion of human resistance, was now the heart of a vast armada, each ship a testament to the ingenuity and resilience of humankind. Every battle, every time loop, had forged these ships and their crews into something more than just survivors. They were a united force, ready to reclaim their future. As the Xorthar ships came into view, the sheer number of human-powered vessels took them by surprise. They had expected the humans to remain fractured, to be scattered and weakened. But instead, the human fleet moved with precision and coordination, each ship operating as a single, unstoppable unit. The technology that Xorthar had once believed to be inferior was now their greatest enemy. The Valor had become a symbol of humanity's indomitable spirit, and every ship in the fleet carried with it the lessons learned from countless battles. The Xorthar, now facing a united force, struggled to match the humans' advanced tactics. The humans had learned to fight as one, anticipating their enemy's every move and countering with devastating efficiency. The battle erupted across the expanse of space, explosions lighting up the void as laser fire and missiles tore through the fabric of the cosmos. The Xorthar fired their weapons with all the might they had, but the human fleet was relentless. They dodged, countered, and struck back with surgical precision. The Valor, leading the charge, moved like a living organism, its energy resonating through the entire armada. Each ship, equipped with the best of human technology, engaged the Xorthar fleet with a level of coordination that left their enemies bewildered. The Xorthar, who had once been so confident in their superiority, now found themselves struggling to keep up with the human force. Every attack they made seemed to be anticipated, every move countered. In the heat of the battle, Captain Ayla Reinhardt stood at the helm of the Valor, watching the fight unfold. Her heart pounded as she saw the ships of humanity working together, each one a reflection of the sacrifices made, the lessons learned. The crew, the Valor, and everything they had fought for had come together in this one moment. It was no longer about surviving, it was about winning. And for the first time in years, the humans weren't on the defensive. They were in control. With every passing minute, the Xorthar found their forces dwindling. The might of their fleet was being chipped away, piece by piece, until they were nothing more than a disorganized mass retreating before the united front of humanity. The once proud empire that had swept across the stars, believing they were unstoppable, was crumbling under the weight of their own arrogance. Their ships, once sleek and menacing, now scattered in defeat. The Valor's fleet, once just a single ship, had become an overwhelming force, too powerful for the Xorthar to resist. As the last of the Xorthar ships fled into the darkness, the human fleet remained victorious. The battle had been won, but it was more than just a military victory. It was the final testament to humanity's strength. The Valor, now more than just a ship, had become the symbol of human resilience, a beacon for the future. Captain Reinhardt stood tall on the bridge, her eyes scanning the quiet space where the enemy had once stood. The battle was over, and with it the Xorthar's reign of terror. The human fleet began to regroup, the damage of the battle evident but not insurmountable. The crew, though exhausted, shared a moment of quiet triumph. They had done the impossible. They had broken the cycle, and now they had secured the future of humanity. The Valor had led them to victory, and it was now the symbol of a new era, one where peace could finally be restored, and the lessons of the past would guide the way forward. Captain Reinhardt's voice echoed through the comms, a calm yet resolute tone. "This is only the beginning," she said, her words a promise to every human listening. We are united now, and we will rebuild. Together, we will ensure that the mistakes of the past are never repeated. Humanity's strength will not be broken. And with that, the valor, now a legend, became the beacon for a new chapter in human history. The final battle had been won, but the future, shaped by unity and strength, was just beginning.